Welcome, everyone. It's so good to hear all of the laughter and the chatter. It's just wonderful. Thanks so much to each one of you for sharing this part of your Sunday evening with us. We're here to talk about humor. So I don't want to see any glum faces as I look out in the circle, okay? No glum faces. Joan, are you having a hard time seeing? Okay, now that I did that, you've moved. Right. Hi, Joan. Can you see me better? Great, great. I want to begin this evening with a joke. But a little preface before the joke. Bob and I lived in North Dakota. Now that's one of those rectangular states up at the top in the middle of the country, and not very many people know where it is. So there it is. And I arrived in North Dakota from Washington, D.C., and I didn't know anything about regional jokes or ethnic jokes or any of that sort of thing. And when I got to North Dakota, the foreigners at the college were from Montana, which is the state next to North Dakota. And there was this running competitiveness that if you were a North Dakotan, you told Montana jokes. If you were a Montanan, you told North Dakota jokes. If you happened to be from Colorado, you were considered a greenie because the license tags at that time were green with white lettering, and the people from Wyoming told greenie jokes, and Coloradans told jokes about Wyoming. And there wasn't any animosity, it was just good Scandinavian humor. So I want to share a joke with you before we begin this evening. And it's a little story, real short. And there was a North Dakotan who went to Minneapolis. And while he was in Minneapolis, he was reading the big city newspaper. And this was his first time of reading a big city newspaper, and that would have been the Minneapolis Tribune, not some little podunk country once a week newspaper. Well, he read through it, he came to the obituary page, and he scratched his head, and then he muttered something like, "You know, that's mighty strange. The folks out here die alphabetically." So on that note, I'm going to invite all of us to sort of allow our funny bones to be tickled this evening, and we're going to begin with a gathering prayer.
Happy Sunday, everybody. And join me in this is a responsive prayer from St. Thomas More titled Prayer for Good Humor. Grant me, O Lord, good digestion and also something to digest. Everyone, grant me a healthy body and the necessary good humor to maintain it. Grant me a simple soul that knows to treasure all that is good and that doesn't frighten easily at the sight of evil, but rather finds the means to put things back in their place. Everyone, give me a soul that knows no boredom, grumblings, sighs, and laments, nor excess of stress because of that obstructing thing called I. Grant me, O Lord, a sense of good humor. Everyone, allow me grace to be able to take a joke, to discover a bit of joy, and to be able to share it with others. Can I tell a dad joke? You have to guess it. It's real quick. Okay. Let's see. What is square, sits in the corner, but travels the world? And travels the world. Oh, a postage stamp. Thank you. Thank you.
Everybody please stand. And we'll be reading responsively. The universe is fundamentally a blessing. In creation, God is both immanent and transcendent. God is as much beyond all words and images as in all forms and beings. For spiritual practice, we find our deep and true selves. Our inner work can be understood as a fourfold journey of befriending creation, befriending darkness, befriending creativity, and befriending new creation. Every one of us is a mystic, since we are born full of wonder and can recover it at any age when befriending creation, as well as befriending darkness. Every one of us is an artist when befriending creativity. Every one of us is a prophet when befriending new creation. Diversity is the nature of the universe. God is compassion. And we, who are all original blessings, sons and daughters of the divine, are called to compassion. There are many wells of faith and knowledge, all drawing from one underground river of divine wisdom. Ecological justice is essential for the sustainability of life on earth. Namaste.
So when Sue asked me to make this reading, I told her certainly I'd be happy to do that. And so she sent it to me, and I read through it, and I thought, well, this is words from Soren Kierkegaard, a 19th century philosopher, poet, theologian, the father of existential thought. And I thought, well, I have no clue who that is. I said, well, if I'm going to read something from him, maybe I ought to find out at least a little bit about who he is and why he was important. And so obviously he was a philosopher. And, you know, when you try to figure out what or who a philosopher is, you end up going down a well that has no bottom. This was a black hole. The further I went, the deeper it got. But it was interesting, and I made a few comments or a few notes that I thought you might find interesting to maybe give you a little perspective about who Kierkegaard was, and I hope you don't mind me taking an extra minute to do that. Essentially, I really was not fully sure if I knew what existentialism was. Obviously, it's a term I've heard a number of times, but didn't know if I really understood it. But basically, it's the philosophical belief that we are each responsible for creating purpose or meaning in our own lives. Our individual purpose is not given to us by gods, governments, or any other authority. Existentialists believe that the nature of existence varies and is individualized to each person. We are defined by our existence, and our existence is made up of our relationship to other people and things in the world. Notice there's no mention of a deity in that. There was a significant amount of discussion about the difference between existentialism and atheism. Are they different? Are they two versions of the same thing? According to Kierkegaard, they are very different, or can be very different. While both focus on the significance of the individual, a theistic essentialist is concerned with the individual's choices in relation to a divinity. An atheistic essentialist is concerned with an individual's choices in a godless universe. And of course, Kierkegaard was a theistic, I'm saying that right? Essentialist. He believed that there was a deity involved in the choices that we each make as an individual. Kierkegaard believed there were three spheres of existence. First, there was the aesthetic or superficial. Second was the ethical, in which values develop in the individual as we mature and begin to influence our behavior. Third is the religious, in which the leap of faith supersedes all other considerations. Kierkegaard describes a religious life as one in which an individual lives a life of duty and seeks above all else to serve others. Also, the religious life is lived when an individual relates themselves to something which transcends their own self, other people, and even this world. Such an individual rests their identity in the absolute and not just in themselves. Kierkegaard believed each of us is a unique perspective consciousness charged with observing the world, interpreting what we see, and ultimately acting on what we believe. And there was what I thought was one of the most interesting comments I have ever seen about prayer related to Kierkegaard. He said, "The function of prayer is not to influence God, but rather to change the nature of the one who prays." The crucial thing, according to Kierkegaard, is to find a truth that is true for you. So, interesting person, interesting individual. And as I said, the further you go into studying him, the more you just have to keep going. It just gets deeper and deeper and deeper. But anyway, if you would join me now in listening to the words from Soren Kierkegaard. "Something wonderful has happened to me. I was caught up into the seventh heaven. There sat all of the gods in assembly. By special grace, I was granted the privilege of making a wish. 'Wilt thou,' said Mercury, 'have youth or beauty or power or a long life or the most beautiful maiden or any of the other glories we have in the chest? Choose but only one thing.' For a moment I was at a loss. Then I addressed myself to the gods as follows: 'Most honorable contemporaries, I choose this one thing, that I may always have the laugh on my side.' Not one of the gods said a word. On the contrary, they all began to laugh. From that I concluded that my wish was granted, and found the gods knew how to express themselves with taste. For it hardly would have been suitable for them to have answered gravely, 'Thy wish is granted.'"
That was great. That was great. We're settled in this evening to enjoy a little humorous banter, as I said earlier. So I would invite each one of us one more time to sort of be open, allow our funny bones to be exposed this evening. So just find that comfortable position and be present to one another. The word humor itself comes from the Latin humus or and that means soil or earth or ground or sod. Other familiar words that are also derived from hummus include human, humble, and humility. The link between all of these does seem fairly obvious. And in the second creation story in Genesis, we see the creation of man and woman as depicted from the soil of the ground. So being human means being of the soil, of humus. So as humans, we are essentially material kinds of things. As Madonna would say, I'm a material girl, you're a material guy. How's that? But there's a little more, because God breathed into each human and continues to breathe into each human the breath of life, which means that humans not only have form and shape, they have spirit. We have, you and I have a soul. This is the unity of spirit and matter. And perhaps in the interplay between spirit and matter, there is the possibility for humor. When we remark that we take ourselves too seriously, specifically those who cannot laugh, they've lost their sense of humor. As I wrote this week in the newsletter, that often happens, doesn't it? It happens not only to people we know, not only to family, it happens to us as well. That's when we're too preoccupied with the affairs of the material world and we become weighed down and we're heavy, and this affects our spirit. It leaves it clouded because we have moved too close to matter and we're not close enough and aware of the energy of our spirit or our souls. Humor lightens us up. It raises our spirits by calling attention to our creatureliness, our rootedness in the earth. And when we forget or we lose this, we lose our very sense of our origins. And we need to be reminded of those origins. And humor is definitely one of the best divinely given gifts to all of us. So to remember our humble beginnings, we share our humility, and you know what? We can laugh out loud.
Well, speaking of laughing out loud, we're going to dive into what makes a joke a joke. Consider this sort of a LOL 101. For starters, why tell a joke? Well, laughter, they say, is really the best medicine, and it's true. Laughter helps release oxytocin and creates a sense of euphoria in your body and mind. Especially that deep belly laugh, you know, the kind that sneaks up out of you when you've been caught off guard with something pretty humorous. I love to laugh really big and loud, as most of you have probably already heard at some point in time somewhere here in Star. Stifling laughter, in my opinion, is like stifling a sneeze. You're just going to end up hurting yourself, so just let it out. All right, so when is a good time to tell a joke? Anytime at all, especially when you want to lighten the mood. Although there are times when it's probably not socially acceptable to start telling jokes, i.e. Great Aunt Edna's funeral service or some other somber experience. But let's be honest, these social norms need to be shaken up a bit, don't you think? So what kind of jokes are there, you say? Well, quite a few, actually. You have your classic knock-knock jokes. Knock, knock. Boo. Aw, please don't cry. Then you have your wordplay jokes. And these are the ones that really tickle my fancy bone, my funny bone and my fancy bone. One example is, why is it impossible to have a nose that is 12 inches long? Because then it would be a foot. And so my all-time favorite joke that I've told like a bazillion times since I've heard it is, how do you catch a unique rabbit? Unique up on him. How do you catch a tame rabbit? Tame way. Then you have your classic one-liners. I used to have a fear of speed bumps, but I'm slowly getting over it. That ghost was such a bad liar, I could see right through him. And I used to hate facial hair, but it grew on me. Jokes are funny because they all have an element of surprise to them, the punchline, as they say. Dan Rowan and Dick Martin were a perfect example of how to deliver a good joke. Their television show Laugh-In was absolutely saturated with funny, albeit corny, jokes, one-liners, and what we now affectionately call dad jokes. In fact, I heard a particularly groan-worthy last weekend. Would you like to hear it? So these two guys were sitting around talking, and the first guy says to the second guy, "Hey, what do you do for a living?" And the second guy says, "Well, I'm an elevator mechanic." And the first guy responds with, "Wow, I bet that job has a lot of ups and downs." That's a true story. That actually got told over last weekend. So every joke, no matter what type, should feel like a little surprise party. If there's no surprise, then there's no joke. So this is not a joke. Why did the teddy bear say no to dessert? Because she wasn't hungry. See, that really wasn't funny at all. This is a joke. Why did the teddy bear say no to dessert? Because she was stuffed. So no matter what type of joke, the main ingredient of all jokes is the element of surprise, and the types of surprises can be different. So Bill, would you like to come tell us a few jokes?
Sure. All of us, I think, love Ellen DeGeneres. I mean, she is, and Sue has collected 3 special jokes that I'm going to share with you. I think they're wonderful. Last night, my brother and I watched 3 movies back to back. Luckily, I was the one facing the television. My grandma started walking 5 miles a day when she was 60. Now she's 97, and we have no idea where she is. I needed a password 8 characters long, so I picked Snow White and the 7 Dwarfs.
So another way to make people laugh out loud is sharing funny stories. Funny stories can be about a situation that you have personally experienced, or they can be a retelling of one someone else has shared with you, or even one that you may have read. In any case, stories often share the humor of exaggeration, which makes them a little different on each retelling, but tickle your funny bone each time they're told or heard. Tonight, we're going to hear some funny stories from a few of you. I'll start. I heard this story many, many years ago from a favorite uncle of mine. He was a very soft-spoken, gentle soul with a slight stoop in his posture. He was a retired Methodist minister and just a real gem of a guy, and was a fantastic storyteller. So they lived out in a very rural area, and their address was basically a wide spot in the road. And as with every out-of-the-way country community, there was that one guy, usually the local drunk, who would do the darndest things. Well, in this story, old Cletus comes staggering into the local joint one evening, ragged, breathless, and absolutely covered from head to toe with scratches, cuts, and bruises. There was grass and leaves all in his hair and his clothes. One of the locals asked, "Now, Cletus, what in the world has happened to you now?" Cletus responded very emphatically that he had fought an alligator. Well, the locals weren't believing any of that. But with every time someone denied the plausibility, Cletus got louder and more animated with the story. He said he was walking along the edge of the road when an alligator tripped him up. And being that alcohol was involved, old Cletus thought he would teach that gator a lesson. He told the locals how he had kicked and he had pulled and he had punched. And just as he thought he got that gator's head under control, the tail would whip up around him and knock him off into the grass again. Now, apparently this fight went on for quite a while, but Cletus swears he finally whooped that gator. The locals just couldn't believe it, so they went to where this wrestling match supposedly took place. And lo and behold, laying right there on the side of the road was old Cletus's gator. He had spent the entire evening wrestling with and was almost beaten by an 18-wheeler tire retread. And I just love that story. I was probably early preteens when I heard that, and I have never forgotten it. It still cracks me up every time I think about it. So, Bill, would you like to come share a story with us?
I don't know where I first heard this story. Probably I've been going to St. Patty's gatherings. Many of you knew John Harrington, and in such college days, they're just wonderful gatherings, and it may have occurred there, but it was a story that I just delight in. I believe that it is likely that all of us carry at least one small vanity, small conceit, that can remain invisible to us even an entire lifetime. Perhaps we should consider ourselves fortunate when some life circumstance or situation opens our eyes, enabling us to see ourselves more clearly, endowing us perhaps a wee bit of humility. This is the story of a shocking revelation that may have come too late. You see, Sean Flannery was reclining comfortably on his deathbed. He had lived a righteous and fulfilling life, and now he was ready to join his ancestors awaiting him in heaven. He looked about, seeing how he was surrounded by his loyal and loving family and friends. His wife Elizabeth stood right beside him, and on the other side of the bed were their 4 devoted sons, 3 of whom were tall, strapping, handsome lads, the pride of the village. The 4th, a rather Weasley-looking boy. Sean had always suspected that this lad had been surreptitiously fathered by another. However, Sean loved him no less than the other 3, and he loved his wife too well to ever confront her openly with this suspicion of a single infidelity. It really no longer mattered to him, but he felt that it was important before he died to give his wife the opportunity to confess and allow him to express his utter and complete forgiveness of this infidelity, to unburden Elizabeth of any secret guilt that she had been carrying silently for years. How wonderful, he thought, that God was affording him the opportunity of this gesture, a final expression of forgiveness and love for his wife. Lifting his head a little, he engages her. Elizabeth, come close. And Elizabeth leans in and says, now, my sweet Elizabeth, tell me the truth. Tell me the truth. That lad, you see, the one scratching his nose, is that one truly my own? After a heavy and pregnant silence, an answer arrives. With softness and gravity, Elizabeth replies, yes, Sean, that one truly is your own. Sean's head drops back abruptly, dying. His eyes rolled back and open, amazed, as if staring in shock and utter disbelief. Elizabeth hovers over her departed husband, and clasping her hands in a prayerful invocation to heaven, she speaks prayerfully. Lord Jesus, take Sean into your loving bosom. He was a good man and a good father and such a loving husband. And Lord, I thank you that you didn't ask me about them other 3. I thank you that. But I share one thing I can't resist. It's a little wee thing that, that philosophical conundrum people learn. Oh, if a tree falls in the forest And if there's no one there to hear it, does it make a sound? And, you know, men and women have been living together for thousands and thousands of years and have wonderful jokes and stories that are all true, each about the other sex. But this conundrum, I saw this on a card one time, and the question, and I'm still wondering about this, if a man makes a statement, and if there's no woman present to hear it, is he still wrong? Thank you.
The answer is yes. Thank you, Bill. Catherine, would you like to come up and share a story with us?
So this story actually happened to me. And so I had to write it down because I couldn't pass by this opportunity to tell a joke in the meantime. The name of this is Namaste, I Can Hear You Too. I was eating by myself in my favorite Thai restaurant. A man whom I never laid eyes on but heard sat down at the booth behind me. He was obviously a regular, chatting it up with the waiters. He ordered a 3-course meal. I continued to eat my meal and forgot about him. I tuned back in when his meal was brought to him. As he began eating, I can tell the soup was brought first. Slurping and gulping, sighing and smacking, I thought to myself in complete horror, what kind of Neanderthal social circle did this guy come from? I simply could not believe the intensity, the fervor, and the range of sounds this man made while eating. I was grateful that I didn't have to watch him. The sounds were enough. My compassion finally kicked in, and I heard myself surrender with the ice-breaking words in my head, well, he obviously likes to eat. With that, the humor and funny bone were activated. As he continued to eat, I went through the cornucopia of sounds I had already heard and realized that a burp and a fart were the only other sounds I had not heard yet. I began smiling to myself with a childlike focused ear. Now at his grunting, chomping, and lip-smacking, open-mouthed good time he was having with his food. I literally had to cover my mouth and hold back the intense laughter. I was now waiting for the signal that he appreciated his food, a belch. In my mind, I encouraged him like an exuberant cheerleader. Let one go. Make the walls rattle, man. Don't let me down. I know you can do it. Burp, burp, burp. He didn't fail me. I could tell he had been through his 3-course meal in record time. He let a mediocre belch go, yet loud enough to be heard in a 4-table radius. I placed my fork on my plate, placed a hand over my mouth, and grabbed my napkin to hide the laughter. Tears of uncontrollable hysterics began to flood my eyes. I contained myself and drank some water and blotted my eyes and my nose. One of the happy, smiling waiters stopped by the table and said, "Too spicy?" I nodded my head yes, and continued to blot my eyes. I heard Sir Chomp-a-Lot get up to leave as he grunted his way out of the seat and could hear him chatting at the register as he paid his bill to leave. Namaste. But in this case, I heard him.
Thank you, Catherine. That was great. I loved your telling of that. That was fantastic. Bob, would you like to come up and share a story with us, please?
North Dakota, as Susan just relayed. I'm speaking up. As you know, I am the husband and considerably older. In fact, when I got married to Susan, I already had a police record because I got caught coming out of the nursery. You can always tell you're in North Dakota. First of all the trees, there's so few of them, they all have numbers on them. And if you have 3 of them together, it's a state park. And the state bird is the field mouse. We just got a new dog, as you all may have heard. And we also heard from a friend of ours in North Dakota who is a cowboy. And he said he had also just gotten a dog. And I asked him, what kind of dog did you get? And he said, a dachshund. And I said, why did you get a dachshund? And he said, because my friends told me to get along, little doggy. I come from a family of 4 of us. My father was one of 9, a French-Irish family, Catholic family. When he was born, my father was born, McKinley was president. That's how long ago it was. And my mother, who was born several years later, ended up having the East Coast distributorship on guilt. She could literally lay it on you. My father was a man who had a great sense of humor, but in a quiet way in which he would quip. He would come home and I would be sitting on the couch occasionally when I was in high school age, and he would say, what are you doing? And I would say, I'm doing nothing. And he would simply quip, walking into the kitchen, the trouble with doing nothing is you never know when you're finished. He once came home from work in his 3-piece suit with the vest and the little chain with his watch and his hat, and he goes into the kitchen. He gets a glass of water. He doesn't say hello to either me or my mother, who were sitting in the living room. He goes back outside with a glass of water, comes back in, goes into the kitchen, doesn't say anything, gets another glass of water, and walks back out the front door, closes it, off he goes. We looked at one another and we thought, this is strange. The door opens, in he comes, gets another glass of water, and as he's going to the door, he turns and says, the car's on fire. I came home one time and he was sitting on the sofa in his easy chair watching our big Philco black and white television, which was about that thick. And I said, what are you watching? And he said, basketball. I said, that's interesting. What's the score? He said, 77-75. I said, wow, it's close. Who's winning? He said, 77. There was the fellow who walked into the psychiatrist's office with a pancake on his head, lettuce over each ear, carrying a cucumber. And the psychiatrist said, can I help you, sir? And he said, yes, I'm here about my brother. Okay. There was Trump, as you know, walked into a Burger King and said to the 17-year-old working behind the counter, I want 2 Whoppers. And the kid looked at him and said, okay, you're the best president we've ever had and the smartest man I know. I had an interesting incident happen to me. I was at graduate school at the University of Idaho. I was going to summer school from 7 until 10. And I was running a garage, a 3-pit shell station for a fellow who was out for some reason. And I was fishing on the weekends, and I was very much a loner. I traveled 45 miles up into the Bitterroot Mountains with my fishing gear and would go camping by myself. And I lived in this apartment that was rented by an elderly professor who said that when he was away for the summer, I could charge whatever I wanted at the grocery store or the butcher shop, which would then have it delivered, of course. And it would be charged to him, which was fine because I looked after the apartment and so forth. Well, I stayed in this apartment in the summer, continuing to fish and work and so forth, and gathered these entrails of these fish that I would bring home and put them in a box, which had been delivered from the meat market, of course, because there was this box. I finally tied string around it, having opened the drawer, which he saved all this string that he had. And I tied it in a little bow, and I went down 3 flights of stairs, and the owner of the apartment was the druggist. His store was on the sidewalk side. So as I started to walk in, a friend hailed me and said, "Come into the garden lounge," which was right next door. It was the hotel bar. And he said, "Come in and we'll have a beer." And I said, "Fine." So I had the box with me. I set it down in the lobby of the hotel and went in and was going to stay there, maybe 20 minutes. 2 hours later, of course, I emerged, walked out to the lobby, no box. I went to the clerk and said, "Look," I explained the situation to him and said, "Where would the box have gone?" He said, "Oh, we saw that. It went on the bus to Spokane with the mail." I said, "Oh, okay." The following 3 days later, after the weekend, I was in the butcher shop, and we were on a first-name basis at this point. And I said, "Herb, how are you doing today?" And he said, "Not very good." I said, "What's the problem?" He said, "I got a box in the mail, was $4.50 postage due, and it was full of the most rotten fish I've ever seen in my life." Such is the nature. And one last story. In Korea, a group of us were in the trenches waiting it was like Christmas Eve or something. And we had our driver who would go 30 miles to the south and to get the mail and supplies. We asked him to bring us back some beer. So we all chipped in and gave him what little money we had. And off he went, and he came back real late. Very late, and we were just kind of mad at him for doing that, but he bought 2 boxes, 2 great big boxes. You know the kind of box you get today that says may require some assembly? One of those boxes. And we opened one, and it was full of our beer, but the other one was filled with 10,000 ping pong balls. Who knows why? And we found that getting intoxicated at age 18, if we lit them with our Zippo lighters and shot them over the top of the trench, the North Koreans would shoot at them. So we spent the rest of the time in great hilarity watching the North Koreans shoot at these things until actually they ran out of ammunition. Our captain met our major who later on, and the major, I heard him say, "Is there anything you need up here?" And this major said, "Well, what we really need are ping pong balls." Anyway, such is life.
Thank you, Bob. I appreciate you sharing those. Those were really funny. And last but not least, our wonderful Peter, would you please come up and share a story with us?
Well, when Sue asked me to be on a program about humor, I thought it's been a slow day for a star because I'm not known as a joke teller and I don't play tricks on people. But I asked a friend of mine, and what should I do? And he said, just tell one of your so-called heartwarming stories of things that happened to you, and they'll think that's either strange or funny. And I'll tell you a couple of quick ones. The first one, that I thought was really kind of heartwarming. I had this wonderful job in college with the Postal Service, and every time there was a break in the school year, summer, spring, Christmas, I was working at the Postal Service. And of course, the jobs they gave you were the ones nobody else wanted, and they were awful, but it helped get me through college. And one time during our Christmas break, my job in the morning was to go out at 4 o'clock in the morning and empty that drive-up box that they have where you can be in your car and you can just drop your mail in. And I have to empty that thing at 4 o'clock in the morning. And I'm on the opposite side, and it's like the coldest day in the history of the universe, and it's dark, and I was freezing, and a lady drove up, and a little tiny lady, and she had a friend with her, but she wasn't quite close enough to drop her Christmas cards in that slot. And I'm on the other side, and I can see that. So I go through the inside of the box, and I clamp down on her Christmas cards and bring them into the mailbox, thinking I did her a favor. And she said, "Ruby, did you see that?" She said, "Somebody's inside that box." And Ruby said, "Shut up, we got to go to work. Now get out of here." They argued for minutes about it, and the lady said, "I'm telling you, there's somebody inside that box." So I finally came around and I said, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to scare you, but I could see what you were doing and I was emptying the box." She broke into laughter and she said, "Tell me your name." And I said, "I'd rather not." And I said, "Are you going to report me?" And she said, "No, I'm going to compliment you and I want your address." And so for several years, I got a Christmas card from her saying, "How about meeting me at the post office and help me with my cards?" Anyway, the next life experience is one that I really was trying to, I'm always trying to do a good deed and it gets fouled up with the methodology. As some of you know, that particularly old timers, years ago, I was the director of the group home that became the Hope Center now for children. And at that time, it was only girls, and I had about 15 at a time living in this group home. And during the morning hours when the girls were in school, I often would get calls from people saying, "I'd like to make a donation to you, I'd like to have a contribution, can you come by the house and pick up something?" Well, I kind of learned the hard way. Oftentimes they were looking for transportation, like if a person called and said, "I've got a TV for you," it was the first one RCA ever made, that was like 10 feet long and the screen was that big, and they wanted somebody to come with a truck. And a lot of the clothing that people wanted to give was not what teenage girls would wear. And so I started sort of screening donations, like, "Can you tell me more about it?" Well, a lady called one morning, and she lived in one of those elegant houses on Woodburn Road. And she said, "Could you use an extra hair dryer?" And I said, 15 girls, I could use all you got. And she said, "Well, come by if you will and pick it up and I'll have it for you." And I think, fine. At the time, I was a young guy, not long out of the service, and I had a little two-seater Fiat convertible sports car. And rather than taking the van that belonged to the home, I said, "Well, I'll just go over there and to her house on my lunch break and pick up this hairdryer." I'm thinking Sunbeam, bzz. I go to this house. It's one of those places where the driveway is about as long as it took you to get to the address. And I go to the front door, and there's a male servant who came to the door, and he said, "Are you here about the hairdryer?" And I said, "Oh, yeah, could you give it to me?" And he said, "Come on around to the back." I thought, got to go around to the back of the house. So I drive all the way around to the back to the garage. He opens it. It's not a Sunbeam. It's a beauty shop type of hairdryer on this metal hood. And I thought, and this is the second coldest day in the history of the world. And it's in the wintertime. And I said, "I'm sorry, I'm going to have to come back another time with the van." And he said, "No, they're going out of town tomorrow. Why don't you do this? Put the top down on that car and let's stand this hairdryer up in the passenger side and you can drive back that way." "I don't think that'll work." He said, "Yeah, let's try it." So we put the top down. He stands it up on the passenger side. And I'm driving down the road with this hairdryer, which is like this tall, and every time I try to turn a corner, this thing almost falls out of the car. And when this happens to you, the only way you can stabilize it is to put the hood on your head. And that is what I did. And also, when this happens to you and you're driving like through Converse Heights, you'll see everybody you know. And they will wave at you, but they'll also look like, what happened to this man? He used to be nice and had good sense. Anyway, I'm freezing, and this hairdryer's on my head, and I went to the Wendy's on Pine Street, and I drove to the drive-in window, and I said, please, black coffee, hot, right away, I need it. And the poor girl said, are you freezing? And I said, no, I can just take this plug and put it in the cigarette lighter of the car and heats my head up. Can you please just give me a cup of coffee? I finally get coffee, and I finally make it back with the hairdryer, but I can tell that some people did happen to see this happen, and occasionally someone would say to me something like, were you being initiated into a fraternity or something? And I said, did you hear a story? Yeah, I heard you were riding down the street in a convertible with a hairdryer in your head. And I still get asked that question. Okay.
Thanks to each of you for sharing the stories. I've heard some of them in the 50 years I've been married to Bob. I've heard some of those at least once. Peter's last story is one of my most favorites, and it was wonderful to be entertained by Catherine and her restaurant experience. It was just great. Emily and Bill, thank you so much for helping us open up and tickle our funny bones. Before we share our own stories, and we have a lot of pizza this evening to share, and I hope that you all will stay because it's really wonderful to share our stories with each other. Now we're halfway there, so let's just continue forward. In the meantime, our offering for this evening, each of you shares with us in wonderful ways. You share your time, you share your talent, and it is your treasure that allows us to have this circle form again and again and again. And sometimes it's a full circle, and sometimes it's a medium-sized circle, and sometimes it's spilling over. But each and every time we gather together, there's a lot of community. There's a lot of sharing, and there's a lot of love because each one of you have a space in our circle. So I'm going to ask, Sandy and Donna to just sort of pass around the offering stars and just be thinking about all of the funny words that we have heard shared with us this evening. Thanks to each one of you for your generosity, because this wouldn't happen if it weren't for each and every one of you. One last story before we adjourn to share our stories and also to share a couple of slices of pizza and water or tea. This was a story that was told in the pulpit at Central by one of the ministers, Alex Stevenson, here a number of years ago. And it's a telling on himself and his sister and their family. When Alex and his sister were quite young, they had just moved to a new town, and they were attending a new Methodist church, and it was Sunday afternoon, and it was in the 70s. So things were a little quieter, a little simpler, and Alex and his sister were in the living room doing something, watching TV, playing a game, whatever. And their mom and dad were in the kitchen. The doorbell rang, and Alex and his sister ran to the door because that's what 7- and 8-year-olds do. It's Sunday afternoon, and that's a time to visit. Well, at the door were some folks from the new church, their church, and there they were, and they asked Alex and his sister, they said, "We are here to see your mom and dad. Are they here?" And his sister looked at Alex, and she looked at the folks who were standing by the door from their new church, and she said, "My mom and dad are in the kitchen loving one another. They can't come to the door right now." They were an affectionate family, and they were very used to seeing their mom and dad hug and kiss and hold hands. But in their determination, mom and dad were in the kitchen loving one another. So, one last thing. I heard this morning as I was listening to the Smothers Brothers being interviewed, and I don't know if any of you saw it, it was on Sunday morning. One of the last comments that Tommy made is so very true. Laughter is holy, and it is. And it is through laughter that we have humor, and humor gives us hope. So thanks to each one of you for being so willing to listen and be part of this. And Barbara and Tanya have our pizzas ready, and there are tables back there. If there aren't enough chairs, just yank one from the circle. Enjoy yourselves. Thank you so much. Be happy.